How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, I want to discuss why stalking makes Bryan Kohberger more dangerous. I've been watching some videos, and a lot of it now is showcasing Bryan Kohberger as a stalker. And they have a few reasons to believe that he was stalking at least one of the four Idaho students before he committed his crime. But before we go into that, I want to touch on the terror of the random kill and why Bryan Kohberger haunts us. I've been working on this, put this together with ChatGPT and Claude, so bear with me. But I want you to picture this. You're living your normal college life, laughing with roommates, going to parties, sleeping safely in your own bed. Then one night, someone you never met, someone who's been watching you, breaks in and destroys everything. That's the nightmare that keeps communities awake long after the crime scene tape comes down. The Bryan Kohberger case hits different than your typical murder story, doesn't it? And if you're reading Dr. Michael Stone's work on evil, which I am now, one of many books that I'm reading right now, you're probably wondering exactly where someone like Kohberger would land on that chilling 22-level scale. Now, guys, if you're familiar with Michael Stone's work, he created this scale of evil. Let's say number one is more about justifying your crime in self-defense. So usually something pressured by the situation that causes you to react. There's no psychopathic tendencies. And then at the highest level, the number 22, it's torture, kill, fueled by psychopathic tendencies. It's a very good book because when I read the book and then I start to see the crimes that are hitting the mainstream media, I try to figure out where that person falls into that scale. And then I try to build my dialogue based on a better understanding of who this individual is and why they did what they did. And basically, I kind of go inside that person's head. And I do it in a way that me and Russ would say tactical empathy. We do it in a way that doesn't change us, but gives us a better understanding of who it is that we're dealing with. And that's why I believe the dialogues we have in this channel are extremely important, because we provide so many different perspectives. And those perspectives will eventually lead, hopefully, into preventive measures, or at least signs that you can recognize. So hopefully you don't fall victim. But let's continue. So let's dig into why random killings feel so much scarier and what the evidence of stalking tells us about the mind behind the crime. So I want to go first with why random violence hijacks our brains. And guys, I want to make this a good dialogue. So along the way, I'm going to ask you guys some questions that I would love for us to answer, and we could build some comments in the dialogue. So feel free to kind of watch the video, pause at the question, and maybe throw some comments in there if you feel you have a good answer to that one question. But there's going to be some questions here I'm posing your way as well. And I think I would love, again, to get your response. So I want to talk about when predictability dies. So here's the thing about most murders. They make sense in some twisted way. Jealous ex-partner, drug deal gone wrong, family dispute that escalated. We can trace the line from motive to murder, even when it's horrific. But when there's no relationship between killer and victim, that's when our mental safety net collapses. So first question, I want you to think about this. How do you protect yourself from someone you don't know is watching you? Even when they do investigations of a killing, let's say even in the Bryan Kohberger case, they are going to look at the people that are closest to that individual because it's easier. And then when they find out that, wow, this really was a random act because we don't believe it happens to be anybody in their social network, well, it makes it a bit different because now we don't know who it could be and we have no idea what the motive is going to be. And I think when I was reading Dr. Stone's book, they say that this is something that is a bit concerning. Like they were talking about crimes in the 60s and how most likely there was some connection between the person who committed the crime and the victim. But as time progressed and as we move forward in years, the crimes that we've seen lately have no real true connection between the person committing the crime and the victim. Bryan Kohberger really doesn't have a true connection to the four Idaho students. So now how do we find somebody at random and we don't even understand the motive behind it? So it becomes extremely tricky. So random killings strip away the illusion that we can control our safety through smart choices. You can't avoid someone you didn't know existed. And that's a scary statement. You can't avoid someone you didn't know existed. You can't read warning signs from someone who was never in your life to begin with. That's why these cases trigger such primal fear. They prove that danger can come from literally anywhere. And again, that creates the mode of mystery. When investigators can't figure out why someone killed, it creates a psychological void that our brains struggle to fill. We're pattern-seeking creatures. We need reasons, even bad ones. The absence of motive becomes almost more terrifying than the crime itself. So I got another question for you. When you hear about a random killing, do you find yourself searching for any connection between victim and killer, no matter how small? I know the investigators do. I know when I'm watching true crime, it's the first thing I do because it's easier, it's more convenient. But then when all those immediate connections get filtered out and it's just no one in that social network, it becomes so much harder now to figure out who did it and why. And therefore, for the people that are watching it, there's no closure. So they also tend to live in a bit of fear. So without motive, law enforcement can't narrow their suspect pool. Without suspects, communities can't feel safe. The investigation drags on, fear compounds, and every strange car in the neighborhood becomes a potential threat. And let's talk about the serial killer shadow. Here's what really gets under people's skin. Random killing suggests predatory behavior. When someone strikes without personal motivation, it raises the specter of serial offending. The public starts wondering, was this their first time or just the first time they got caught? This transforms the crime from a single tragedy into a potential pattern. Communities begin looking over their shoulders, wondering if they're being watched by someone they'll never see coming. How scary is that? I want to go back to Stone's scale, and I want to talk about Kohberger. Where would he land on this 22-level scale? Because remember, with Kohberger, he was so sloppy that I would like to think this was his first effort to live out his fantasy. We would like to think that because he was really sloppy. I think there was a lot that came into play of why he was sloppy, including the pressure of time. I think that eventually as he was rolling around the neighborhood, he decided, I'm just going to do it. And that's where he just wasn't in as control as he would like to have been. There was too many obstacles that messed with the perfect plan. And I really do think he was trying to model Bundy. Go in, and I think he wanted to take the stalker out, take the one he was stalking out of the apartment. Sort of what Bundy did with one of his kills. But with that said, he was sloppy. Now, people, was that his first one? I would like to assume so because of how sloppy he was, but we really don't know. I think the selfies at one point we thought maybe those are signatures. But with that said, since I'm reading Most Evil, I know Dr. Michael Stone's fascinating work, so I'm very familiar. I read his older book. Now I'm reading the newer book, more updated. So Stone created a 22-level hierarchy of evil behavior based on detailed biographies of over 600 violent criminals, ranging from self-defense, as I mentioned, so that's self-defense murders at level 1 to serial torturer murderers at level 22. And as you read the scale, if you notice his scale, I think the first 8 have no psychopathic traits, and then eventually the psychopathic traits are introduced. The first 8 are usually dealing with some type of pressure, external pressure, and maybe some type of emotion that connects to it, like rage or jealousy. But then it's funny because even with the emotions, like I was learning about jealousy, you know, how jealousy could be, I'm jealous because this man was able to get my wife's attention, and I want to be with my wife, and I'm jealous because he has my wife. And maybe you can act in rage on that. And that would be maybe level 2 or level 3 of Michael Stone's scale. But there's other things of jealousy that are more vain. Like now that he won that girl, I'm jealous that he could be better than me, or I see him as being better than me. So this really has nothing to do with the girl he won, but rather my vanity. And that could be higher on the scale. It's a very interesting read. I'm truly enjoying it because it goes from, as I said, pressure to act, to being emotionally driven, tied in with pressure to act. And then eventually you start to, as the scale gets higher, you start to introduce some level of psychopathy. And that is interesting because then you have the lack of empathy. And eventually when you get all the way to the highest level, that 22, empathy is gone. That's why we have torturous murderers at the highest level. So where would Kohberger fit on the scale? Based on the alleged evidence, he's probably looking at somewhere around level 16 or 17. And here's why I thought that. Psychopathic killers who commit multiple murders, often with a degree of premeditation. These are people who kill for psychological gratification rather than material gain or passion. And guys, I forgot to add that there's also premeditation involved. So the less impulsive, maybe the less impulsive, the higher the scale. Sorry about that. The higher the scale, the more impulsive, maybe the lesser the scale, because that's where the emotions run in. So level 17, there could be one more. I did 16 or 17. Level 17 are serial killers with psychopathic features who kill when in a state of extreme rage, but show some capacity for normal behavior between episodes. To be honest with you, I think Bryan Kohberger was just trying to discover who he was. And I think he killed because he felt gratified by it. I truly do. Well, at least that was his main goal with the one, maybe. The alleged stalking behavior pushes him well beyond impulsive killers. So that's level 7 through 10. Stone scale accounts for premeditation, psychological motivation, and the presence or absence of torture. So those are the main things you have to take note of when you're reading his scale. And I'll read that again because that's important. It accounts for premeditation, so that's going to move you higher in the scale, psychological motivation, and then the presence or absence of torture. If Kohberger truly stalked his victims for weeks or months, studying their routines and vulnerabilities, that demonstrates the kind of calculated predatory behavior that Stone associates with higher levels of evil. I mean, if the other 4 were not in the house and try to stop him at some level, who knows what he could have done with, I think it would have been Maddie would have been the one that he was stalking. So who knows what would have happened if he would have tried to be like Ted Bundy and take her out of the house. They would have all woke up. She would have been missing. And who knows to what extent he would have carried this out. It's scary to say, but there could have been something worse in store. So thank God they were able to fight back to some extent. What bumps him up from lower levels? So we have the systematic surveillance suggests psychopathic planning. So again, he's stalking, he's watching. Multiple victims killed in a single event because there was nothing getting in his way at that point. No apparent material motive. This was psychological. And the coldness of studying victims before killing them. What might keep him from the highest levels? I thought that'd be interesting to ask. No evidence of torture or prolonged suffering. And again, I honestly think because to some extent his plan was not carried out the way he wanted to carry out, I honestly think he was looking to take her out of the house. So we don't really know if he could have been higher in scale. We don't know how far he was going to test these theories of who he really is or was, however you want to word that. Victims were killed relatively quickly, but remember, victims were killed relatively quickly because he was in survival mode. This was not part of his plan. So he is reacting to the obstacles. So again, that doesn't really say much about who he is because he was forced to react to them coming at him. And no apparent sexual sadism or cannibalism. Yeah, I don't know about cannibalism, but we don't know about the sexual sadism. We don't know what he would have done if the other ones didn't intervene. Again, was he just going to come in and take her out, or was he looking to kidnap her and hold her somewhere else for a bit more longer term? Now, this gives me another question I'd like to ask you. What do you think? Does the planning and stalking make someone more evil than a killer who acts in sudden rage? Or does the absence of torture keep them from the very top of Stone Scale? As I mentioned, and guys, I recommend you read that book. It's called Most Evil. And you got to read the more updated book. And what's good about me reading this, I'm learning as well. And it's great because I think when you learn something and you want to try to go ahead and relay what you learned to an audience like yourself, this helps me hold on to the lessons a bit longer. It gives me a chance to apply what I'm learning and just kind of go over things in my head that really solidify the lessons that I'm getting from what I'm reading. So then the stalking factor. So this is something that I want to cross into real quick. I want to talk about how they have determined that Kohberger could have been stalking at least one of the four, and I think it's Maddie. So let's think about what makes the Kohberger case so chilling. So you got cell phone records allegedly show his device pinging near the victim's house at least 12 times before the murders, mostly late at night or early morning when most people were asleep. Security cameras caught what appeared to be his white Hyundai Elantra circling the neighborhood repeatedly in the weeks leading up to the crime. And this isn't someone who snapped in a moment of anger. This is someone who hunted. I'm going to say her, but if you want to say them, I understand. We don't really have enough at this point, but definitely hunted her. That's what I believe. I got another question for you. What goes through someone's mind during all those late night drives past the house? What are they thinking? Planning? Rehearsing? That's a very powerful question. That's a very powerful question. And the fact that they're coming by that late at night or that early in the morning, I mean, they're looking for the perfect opportunity to carry out what he planned on carrying out. And I'm telling you, later on when they decide to interview Kohberger and he's more open, I am telling you, it will not shock me if he says he was planning on taking her out of the house. I truly believe that. There's also some speculation about the Mad Greek restaurant. The theory suggests that Kohberger may have first encountered some victims there, possibly following them on social media after seeing them at work. While the restaurant owner disputed this, it illustrates something crucial about how stalking often begins. Here's what makes these initial contact points so dangerous. So you have the normalization process. A customer at your workplace doesn't seem threatening. Someone who orders food and makes small talk appears harmless. This normalcy provides perfect cover for a predator to study potential victims without raising suspicion. I could just go to where you work, watch you, see what you're about, and you may not even know you're being watched. Then you got the digital bridge. Once a stalker knows where you work, finding you online becomes much easier. And it's funny because if I have my cell phone and I stand next to you, there's a chance that the cell phones will know that we were next to each other and those social media platforms picking up. And all of a sudden, I'll have a thing, let's say on Facebook, as if I know this person and put out a friend request. So even if they may have a name that's not so easy to find, there's a good chance that when the two phones are close together for a certain amount of time, the social media platforms will pick it up thinking that you guys know each other. That's why if you guys want that private profile, I recommend private profiles. Even though I don't have one because of what I do, I highly recommend you do have a private profile. So again, once a stalker knows where you work, finding you online becomes much easier. First name and workplace can lead to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Suddenly your entire life becomes visible to someone you barely notice. There was things saying right now that the last photo that she posted or that the group posted where they're back in that apartment on college grounds, that was kind of alert for Kohberger to know they're there. They're at that house. So let's start getting your plan in motion. Then you got the fantasy development. So each innocent encounter feeds the stalker's developing obsession. That's scary. So every time they come into the restaurant, in this case, Mad Greek, what looks like an instant encounter just feeds that stalker's obsession. They start to feel like they know you, like there's a connection in their mind. And also in their mind, watching you serve coffee transforms into intimate knowledge of your personality. The escalation pathway, what starts as I'll just stop by her work again, becomes I need to know where she lives, becomes I need to know her schedule, becomes something much darker. Look at that transition, right? I'll just stop by her work again. Now I need to know where she lives. And then eventually I need to know her schedule. Guys, this is all levels of control. These are levels of control. Here's a question for you. How many times have you noticed the same person in different places without thinking anything of it? That's exactly what makes stalking so insidious. It hides in plain sight until it doesn't. Now I want to go from watching to acting, the psychological escalation. So we also did premeditation sort of and planning. Let's do the psychological escalation. Here's what separates stalking from casual interest, and it's escalation. Remember that word, escalation. Each drive-by, each period of surveillance likely fed whatever fantasy was building in his mind. But there's more going on psychologically than just planning. I wanted to put in this voyeuristic or voyeurism. Even in corrections, we have PREA. And outside of sexual assault, voyeurism is also considered a major threat because voyeurism could lead to sexual assault. Could be caught up in the fantasy of eventually having or trying to commit to a sexual assault. So I had to put this in there because voyeurism, I think, is a big thing in escalating someone from stalking to actually going in and committing the act. I think the voyeurism is where they start to build on their fantasy, but they start to get obsessed. And then the next step is to start trying to plan it out. And by the way, guys, and I'm sure we'll get to it when we talk about control and power dynamic, the more they start to observe the victim, the more they start to observe the routine, the more they start to feel they have control. And therefore, they may become a bit more courageous in their efforts, maybe getting a little closer before they actually go in, maybe a little closer to the window. And then eventually checking to see if the door is open. So voyeurism to me is where the obsession builds in. That's in my mind, how it begins to escalate. So voyeurism isn't just about sexual gratification. It's about power. Watching someone who doesn't know they're being watched creates a sense of secret dominance. The voyeur knows intimate details about their target's life while remaining invisible themselves. You know, again, that kind of notes where Kohberger was sloppy, right? Because there was a lot of people saying, hey, I feel like I'm being watched. And, you know, maybe I've seen this person before. So again, he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. So again, he made a lot of mistakes, not just in the final act, but also prior to that, because he was seen. There's even people that said that lived next to him that thought he was kind of funny, you know, that thought that he may be watching them. So he was sloppy at every level. And guys, I do recommend if you guys get a chance, try sharing out the material. I don't really get a lot of subs to this channel for some reason, so it really goes by word of mouth. But there's a lot of information here that I put together that I think can truly be helpful to people that are watching it. I don't just report. what's there. Actually, it's probably my biggest weakness is it's hard for me to keep track of all the changes. But what I try to do is I try to give perspective. And that's what makes, I think, this channel different than other channels. So building the fantasy. Every observation becomes a piece of a larger fantasy puzzle. Now listen to this. She always turns off her bedroom light at 11:30. They leave the sliding door unlocked. The house is quiet by 1 a.m. These aren't just logistical details. They're building blocks for violent fantasies. Now here comes the ownership illusion. Prolonged surveillance creates a twisted sense of intimacy and ownership. The stalker begins to feel like they know their victims, like they have a relationship with them. Of course, it's entirely one-sided, but in the stalker's mind, it becomes real. The fantasy gets twisted with reality to some extent. And it's funny because you may even see that with people who stalk celebrities. They may fall in love with the role the celebrity plays, thinking that they're talking to them. And then it turns out it's a lot different. And then when they meet the person in reality, the person resists. And next thing you know, they go ahead and commit their aggressive act, and probably even thinking in their mind that the person wants it, that they're not really saying no, that they want it, but, you know, the resistance to them isn't a resistance. It's they want it, and I'm helping them get it. How sick is that? That could be definitely some level of narcissism there. They're saying, no, I don't want this. Oh, of course you want it, and I'm here to give it to you. The inadequacy of watching, but watching eventually stops being enough. The fantasy demands escalation. The stalker has rehearsed the crime mentally so many times that acting it out starts to feel inevitable, almost like they're just completing something they've already begun. I want you to consider this. At what point does surveillance cross the line from planning to inevitable violence? Is it when they first drive by, or when they've done it so many times they've memorized every detail? You know, the latter is extremely important because that's what gives them the control to take the next step. That's what actually gives them the control to take the next step. That's scary, guys. And that's voyeurism. I want to get to control and the power dynamic. So when someone stalks before they kill, it reveals something particularly disturbing about their psychology. They're not just planning murder. They're already exercising power over their victims. Every time Kohberger allegedly drove past that house, he was practicing domination. The victims had no idea they were being watched, studied, or cataloged. And that could be a thrill for people that are watching someone from a distance, because they know something that the other party doesn't know. Their most private moments, coming home late, turning off bedroom lights, morning routines, all become data points for someone planning their deaths. It's powerful. Here's something that makes Kohberger case even more chilling. His academic background. As a criminology PhD student, he wasn't just some random person with violent fantasies. He was someone systematically studying exactly how to commit crimes and avoid getting caught. And we've discussed it in other videos. I think he was also studying this because he wanted to know more about himself. I think this was a discovery for him. He was trying to figure out who he was or who he is. So how the academic knowledge applied criminally. He understood evidence collection and crime scene processing. Even though he was sloppy, he still understood it. He knew how investigations typically unfold and where they focus first. He had studied previous serial killers and their methods, and he understood the psychological profiles investigators would create. And I want to mention something. He may knew of all this, but it fell apart, and I still think it was the pressure of time. I did a short on this, like the pressure of time where it was do or die moment. He decided to jump in, couldn't wait any longer, and that's where it just got real sloppy. But again, he did come prepared to not leave any evidence. He did proper surveillance. I mean, we all know that this was premeditated. It just, the pressure of time. The professor concerns. Reports suggest that some faculty and fellow students found Kohberger's interest in violent crime unusually intense. He allegedly asked female classmates invasive questions about their thoughts on being raped and murdered. These weren't academic discussions. They were red flags. His academic work gave him the perfect cover to study violent behaviors without suspicion. When someone researches serial killers for their dissertation, their browser history and library checkouts don't raise alarms. But was he studying for academic purposes, or was he learning techniques? I mean, think about this. Here's another question for you. Does having academic knowledge of criminal behavior make someone more dangerous when they decide to act, or does it just make them better at hiding what they were already planning to do? I want to talk about the victim selection process. Here's perhaps the most unsettling aspect. Stalking suggests these killers can adapt their victim selection. If Kohberger was capable of identifying, studying, and targeting the Idaho students, in this case, I believe it was the one, he likely possessed the psychological framework to choose other victims under different circumstances. So if he wasn't caught, there would be a good chance, obviously, he would do this again, each time trying to live out a fantasy that never gets to what he wanted to be. That's the funny thing. A lot of people have talked to serial killers who said, you know what, the fantasies I have, I don't know, reality just doesn't match to those fantasies, so they keep on trying. Here's perhaps the most unsettling aspect. Stalking suggests these killers. Oh, I read this, sorry. This adaptability is what separates stalking killers from those who act impulsively or within their existing social circle. The threat isn't contained, it's portable. I got the community terror effect when no one feels safe, or when nowhere feels safe. Random violence with stalking elements create a unique form of community trauma. It's not just this happened to them, it's this could happen to me. People start checking their rear view mirrors more often. They notice cars that seem to appear too frequently. They wonder who might be watching. Question for you guys. After hearing about cases like this, do you find yourself more aware of your own routines and who might be observing them? You never know. Then you have the invisibility problem. One of the most disturbing aspects of stalking is how normal it can appear. Late night drives could be someone working odd hours. Repeated appearances in public spaces might seem coincidental. Social media following feels like normal digital behavior. This invisibility means stalking can continue for extended periods without raising alarms. By the time the pattern becomes clear, escalation may already be underway. So where does this leave us? I want to go back to the Stone scale real quick. If we're placing Kohberger on Dr. Stone's scale, the alleged stalking behavior, the apparent lack of prior relationship with victims, and the calculated nature of the crime suggests someone operating at a high level of evil. Stone's scale recognizes that extreme premeditation and psychological domination represents some of the most dangerous forms of criminal behavior. So what's your take? Does the systematic stalking make this worse than a crime of passion, even if the final act was quicker and less torturous? I want to talk about understanding the fear. The reason cases like Kohberger haunt us isn't just violence, it's the violation of our fundamental assumptions about safety and predictability. When someone can watch us without our knowledge, study our habits, and plan our harm, it reveals how thin the line really is between our private lives and potential danger. I will guarantee you at one point, he was right up close to those windows, maybe right up close to those sliding doors watching them. Because if he knew their routine from him watching, he would try to be a little bit more ballsy with attempts, so he would get closer and closer. He wouldn't just decide one day I'm going to jump and do it. No, he's going to get closer and closer until he feels he has total control. So I will guarantee you there were times where he was up close and personal during those late hours, watching them while they slept. Scary thing is, I wonder if he was ever in the apartment watching them sleep prior to all this happening. I don't know if that ever happened, but it wouldn't shock me if he was. Because again, he knew the layout, that maybe he snuck in one night to a party house, you never know. And he just was there watching them sleep. Imagine how freaky that would be. The reason case like Kohberger is not just, okay, we talked about that. It's not paranoia talking. That's a realistic acknowledgement that some threats operate outside the normal rules of human interaction. Some people don't just need a reason to hurt you. They just need opportunity and access. So here's the bigger picture. This is the end, guys. Random killing with stalking elements represent a particular form of evil that combines patience, planning, and predatory behavior. They remind us that danger doesn't always announce itself with obvious warning signs or personal conflict. Sometimes it just watches and waits. It's my final thought: in a world where anyone can be watched and studied without their knowledge, how do we balance necessary caution with the ability to live freely? That might be the most haunting question of all, and one that cases like Bryan Kohberger forces us to confront, whether we want to or not. So it's just a dialogue I wanted to have. Eventually, I think I'm going to bring someone else on and break this down a little bit more. I was thinking about maybe getting Denise Schoenwald on. I think this would be a good discussion to kind of revisit, but I wanted to put it out there now, and then maybe I will revisit this again once more with Denise Schoenwald. Again, I had her on before. We discussed Lakin Snelling. She's a mental health counselor, nurse too, but she also has a license in mental health counseling, and I think it would be good to get her interpretation of these questions. As always, guys, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you when I post a video. And stay safe.